His eyes are cold and restless, and his wounds have almost healed. And she'd give half of Texas just to change the way he feels. She knows his love's in Tulsa, and she knows he's gonna go. Well, it ain't no woman, flesh and blood, it's that damn no rodeo. It's bulls and blood, it's the dust and mud, it's the roar of a Sunday crowd. It's the white in his knuckles, the gold in the buckle, he'll win the next go round. It's boots and chaps, it's cowboy hats, it's spurs and let it go. It's the ropes and the reins and the joy and the pain, and they call the thing a rodeo. Best to hold him when his love comes to call, but his need for it controls the man, and her back's against the wall. And it's so long, girl, I'll see you when it's time for him to go. You know the woman wants her cowboy like he wants his rodeo. It's bulls and blood, it's the dust and mud, it's the roar of a Sunday crowd. It's the white in his knuckles, the gold in the buckle, he'll win the next go round. It's boots and chaps, it's cowboy hats, it's spurs and let it go. It's the ropes and the rain and the joy and the pain, and they call the thing a rodeo. It'll drive a cowboy crazy, it'll drive a man insane, and he'll sell off everything he owns just to pay to play the game. And a broken home and some broken bones is all he'll have to show for all the years that he's been chasing this dream they call rodeo. It's bulls and blood, it's the dust and mud, it's the roar of a Sunday crowd. It's the white in his knuckles, the gold in the buckle, he'll win the next go round. It's boots and chaps, it's cowboy hats, it's spurs and let it go. It's the ropes and the reins and the joy and the pain, and they call the thing a rodeo. It's the broncs and the blood, the steers and the mud, and they call the thing a rodeo. Bow-bow.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Rossi, and I am the Media Alliance of Houston president. Welcome to our March webinar. It's hard to believe that 2 years ago, this was our last in-person luncheon that we had before we started to meet virtually, and also before they announced that the 2020 rodeo was stopping that year. So just a little blast from the past that 2 years ago, this is where we were. We would like to thank all of our corporate sponsors: Odyssey, Basis Technologies, Rivet Media, Clear Channel, Cox Media Group, Effective, Estrella Media, Freed Advertising, iHeart, KHOU, KIAH, KPRC, KTRK, Love Advertising, MMI, Outfront, Telemundo, and Univision. Membership renewal emails were sent out for January through June membership. If you have any questions or are interested in becoming an MAH member, you can reach out to our VP of Membership, Avery Dominich. If you haven't already heard, next month is our Star Awards Gala on Thursday, April 14th at the Post Oak Hotel. We are celebrating 70 years of Alliance of Women in Media with an elegant disco-themed gala. We will be honoring our 2022 Silver Star recipient, Jay Sitta. We also will be celebrating our finalists for each category and announcing the winner of each category live at our gala. We're excited to celebrate the hard work of our community, and we hope that you will be there to join us. We would also like to congratulate all of our Star Awards finalists. You can find a complete list of all the finalists on our website. And if you are a finalist and haven't sent in your headshot yet, I would like to remind you to go ahead and do so we can get that in our program. We would love for you to join us on April 14th. You can reach out to Stephanie Weaver McKee to buy your tickets, and we look forward to seeing you there. We also are working on getting pictures from the last 70 years of our organization so that we can showcase some of those from a lot of the fun events that we have done. So if you have any pictures, please send those to Stephanie as well, and we'll include her email in the chat. We want to make sure that we are honoring those who have passed. So for the in memoriam, if you know anyone who has passed in the last 2 years, please get those names to Kelly Rodriguez. We're making sure that we have the most up-to-date list, but we want to make sure we're not missing anyone so we can honor those in our community as well. We also want to make sure that we are able to celebrate those who are retiring. So in the last 2 years, if anyone at your company has retired, we would like to be able to celebrate their years of dedication to our community. So please send those names to me, and I am keeping a list of those names as well. And also with Star Awards, while one of the purposes of Gala is to celebrate our community, we also are raising money to invest in the future of our advertising community through scholarship. A big way that you can help us get ready for Gala is to help donate silent auction items. So if you have any items that you would like to contribute, you can reach out to Stephanie to help with our fundraising ventures, and we would be very appreciative. And finally, our last announcement. April will be a webinar for all of our members where we will go over any bylaw changes that we have, and also we will be inducting our new board. It will be on Wednesday, April 20th, and we'll be sending out a reminder about that to all of our members. But we just wanted to give everyone a heads up because it's not on our typical Wednesday of the month. It'll be a week after due to where Gala is following during April. So we just wanted to make everyone aware of that. And so with that, I will be turning it over to Kelly Rodriguez, our parliamentarian, who is going to be introducing today's speaker.
Great. Hey guys, everybody looks great today. We have one of our favorite speakers, Evan. You are I think a four-peat here. We've had you before, but we don't have many people come back like we have you. You are honestly one of our favorites. And this is his busy season, as y'all know. There's a lot of politics happening in Texas right now. So Evan's super busy, so we're all very lucky that he is with us today. To introduce Evan, he is the CEO and co-founder, if you did not already know this, of Texas Tribune. It's a pioneering nonprofit, nonpartisan digital news organization whose deep coverage of Texas politics and public policy can be found at the website texastribune.org. Evan is also the host of Overheard with Evan Smith, a weekly half-hour interview program that airs on PBS stations around the country. Previously, he spent nearly 18 years at Texas Monthly, including 8 years as the magazine's editor and year as its president and editor-in-chief. And some of y'all may know this, but Evan is actually stepping down sometime this year as the CEO of Texas Tribune, but have no fear. He will stay involved as a senior advisor to the TBD CEO. And so he will be definitely involved. But hopefully once he steps down, he can go out and have some fun. We were talking a little bit before this and I was like, Evan, a fun fact. He's like, I'm just working. So I'm hoping, Evan, after you step down, you come back and give us all these fun facts of things you've been doing. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Evan. And if you do have any questions along the way, please ask in the chat and we will get to those because I know we're going to have a really fun-filled packed of information for the next 40, 50 minutes. So thanks so much. So Evan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Kelly, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I am no fun. That's true. You've definitely got me pegged right there. It's all work. But you're right. When I'm no longer the CEO of the Tribune, it's entirely possible that I'll be able to find some time to have some fun. Everybody, it's good to be with you. I feel like I need to say this now as we're about to enter the third year of the pandemic. I sure wish that I was with you in person. And when I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to be with some of you in person, it's always been great. We'll get back to being in person again soon. I'm today sitting in my office downtown in Austin. Our office was closed for the first 17 months of the pandemic, from March 16th of 2020 until July 6th of 21. Came back to the office. Omicron suddenly became a factor, Delta first and then Omicron. And by December, we were closed again. We actually only reopened this office last Monday. We tied it to the city of Austin's public health DEFCON level. We were at stage 5 for a long time. Then we went down to stage 4. And at stage 4, we made the decision to open the office. Well, by the time we were actually in here last week on Monday, it was at stage 3. And now I'm sitting here at stage 2. And the CDC has told us we don't have to wear masks as long as we're vaccinated. And here in the office, we require vaccination for people to come back to the office. So I'm seeing the bottom halves of the faces of people in my office for the first time in a long time. And in fact, I've met a bunch of people in the last couple of days who I had not met for the last 2 years, who'd been working for us, and I'd never actually met them. And we're all probably going through a version of this as we come back to our offices, if we're fortunate to be back to our offices. The last 2 years have changed the way we live and the way we work so much. And here's the thing, we'll never really be out of this. The pandemic is now an endemic, right? It's never going to go away, not entirely anyway, but we all have to get back to our lives. The after will be different from the before. If there's nothing else we know for sure, is that the experience of the last 2 years will change us, not just in the short term, but over time, the way we work, the way we live. And so part of what the adjustment in front of us is going to be to this new normal, because we've sure been living in the new abnormal for some time. I'm going to share my screen and put some slides up. I'm going to talk about the Texas Tribune briefly. I'm really going to spend the bulk of my time talking about the political situation in Texas, and I'm going to give you an opportunity at the end to ask all kinds of questions, because I know you will. We've never been at a time in my experience in Texas where there's been more interest in politics, where the average person, not just an insider, but a regular person, a civilian, is aware of the big fights happening over issues and of the candidates on the ballot. And I just think there's a lot to talk about on that today. So Kelly said some nice things about the Tribune, which I appreciate. But for the record, we've been in business now since November 3rd of 2009. We're in year 13. We started as a nonprofit, nonpartisan digital news organization covering politics and public policy because we looked out in the world and saw that there were many fewer news organizations than were the case 20 years ago. Fewer newspapers, fewer TV and radio stations, many fewer reporters at the organizations that are in business then, and especially the case now. There needed to be a reliable, credible source of news for people in the state. There are 29.1 million people in Texas, according to the census. Our voter turnout has historically been, at least in the modern era, just dismal. People are not paying attention. People are not checked in, they're checked out. And, you know, there are these enormous fights over things like public education, healthcare, immigration, transportation, criminal justice in this country. The work of the last legislature. You had major legislation on abortion, on critical race theory, on how elections would be administered. No need to tell people in Houston about the challenges we have with administering elections. I know that your elections administrator in Harris County just resigned yesterday over problems with the way the election was conducted last week. We had major bills related to the ability of transgender student athletes to play sports based on their gender identity as opposed to their biological sex. We had law passed finally after many attempts, unsuccessful attempts, to legalize the permitless carry of handguns. A lot of big issues in the legislature, and a lot of big races on the ballot this time. And yet a lot of people are not paying attention. So we started 12 years ago, 13 years ago, anticipating that there would need to be a regular place to go to get news and information. And so we have been that. We reach more than 5 million unique visitors to our site a month. Our audience is more than double what it was before the pandemic. We reach tens of millions of additional people each year through the likes of Apple News and other off-platform sources of traffic. Everybody in power in Texas reads the Texas Tribune first and all day, but we also reach an extraordinary number of people who are not in the politics business or in the policy business, but just want to be more thoughtful and productive citizens. And that's what this is about. This is not about journalism. This is about democracy. Been saying that for 13 years, never been more true than now. This is about democracy. A properly functioning democracy requires people in a state like Texas to be better informed, fully engaged, and that's what we're attempting to do. TexasTribune.org. We've also raised $100 million as a nonprofit news organization over the last 12 plus years to pay for serious journalism. Let me look ahead to the elections, or look back and look ahead, I should say, to the 2022 elections. So we just had a primary in Texas on March the 1st. We have all of our statewide elected officials on the ballot: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, land commissioner, ag commissioner. We have some number of Supreme Court justices, some number of judges on the Court of Criminal Appeals. We have some members of the State Board of Education. As we always do every 2 years, every even-numbered year, we have all 150 members of the Texas House. Oh, what's going on there? Hold on. Okay. We have all 150 members of the Texas House on the ballot. And we have, in this case, because redistricting just happened, we're in an every 10 years cycle of redistricting. All 31 members of the Texas Senate are on the ballot. Typically, those terms are staggered. We also have all 38 congressional districts on the ballot. So there's a whole bunch of races on the ballot. Not all of them are that interesting. Not all of them, frankly, are competitive. But there are a number of very high-profile races that were on the ballot on Tuesday last week, on March 1st. And I thought we would talk about a little bit of what happened. But before we get into the specific results, I want to raise a couple of narratives that emerge from the election cycle that I think will be of interest to you. First of all, to my point about voter turnout in Texas not being very good, only about 17% of registered Texas voters cast ballots in this last primary season. Invert that. 83% of registered Texas voters did not bother to vote. 17% of the population of registered voters in Texas are deciding for the rest of us who advances to the fall elections. And you know what? That's bad enough on its face. But in a state like Texas, where the maps are drawn every 10 years to make elections not competitive, Republicans in charge of the state have drawn maps favorable to Republican candidates. They've made it so that most of those races are not competitive. Democrats, when they ran the state a generation ago, did the exact same thing. Redistricting is political. I'm shocked to discover that. Next, you'll tell me there's gambling in Casablanca. Redistricting has always been political. The party in power views the power of redrawing district lines as an incumbency protection program. The majority wants to remain the majority. But when you don't have competitive elections in the fall, the winner is really decided in the primary. Let's say you have a legislative or a congressional district where a Democrat cannot possibly win. There are also some where a Republican cannot possibly win. The action is all in the March primary. Which Republican will be the candidate in November who will ultimately win? Which Democrat will be the candidate? And the parties in the primaries tend to reward the people who play to the base. So part of the reason that politics in Texas and elsewhere is so polarized is that without competitive elections in the fall, there's no incentive for any candidate to run to the middle. Instead, they run to the end. We have an entire political system where both parties are producing candidates who are the burnt end of the brisket. They're not in the delicious middle part. They're all the way on the burnt ends. So only 17% of people vote in the primaries. That means in most cases, only 17% of the primary vote, the registered voters in Texas, are deciding for the rest of us who's going to govern Texas over the next 2 years and 4 years. And if you look at it, here is what the last 3 election cycles have looked like in the primary. Presidential year turnout is always higher than midterm turnout. So it's not that surprising that more people participated in the primaries in the presidential year. But goodness gracious, look at that 2022 turnout. Only 11.3% of Republican registered voters bothered to turn out in the primary, and only 6.2% of Democratic primary registered voters turned out in the primary. I mean, that's just embarrassing. This is a terrible level of civic engagement. Anybody who is a registered voter who did not vote, I'll say, shame on you, because you're ceding the responsibility of deciding who is going to run this state and make decisions that materially affect you to the people who bother to turn out, and those tend to be the most active activists. So the turnout question is a significant one, certainly. Related to that is that Hispanic voters in Texas have tended to vote much more Democratic than Republican over the years until the 2020 presidential election, where Donald Trump made inroads in the Rio Grande Valley and along the border from South Texas all the way up to El Paso. Donald Trump won Valverde and Zapata County against Joe Biden, those two counties. No Republican candidate for president had ever won those counties before. Donald Trump also held the margins where Biden did win South Texas and border counties. Biden's margin was much, much lower than Hillary Clinton's had been 4 years earlier, because Trump made inroads in pretty much all of those counties. So there was a lot of interest in seeing what would happen in this election cycle. Would Republicans be able to continue their better performance among Hispanic voters in these majority Hispanic counties? And I think the answer is yes, but with an asterisk. Republicans more than doubled their turnout in the Republican primary in the Rio Grande Valley compared with the last time we had a primary in a midterm, which was 2018. And if you look at the visualization of this from the Texas Tribune, you see that only 11,200 Republicans turned out in the 2018 primary in the Rio Grande Valley versus 27,000 who turned out today in this election cycle. So that is significant improvement on the part of the Republicans. What I will also say is look at the Democratic turnout. It is no different from primary to primary, and there is still a significant advantage to Democrats over Republicans in terms of turnout and enthusiasm. In the case of 2018, you basically had Democrats turning out at 5x Republicans. In 2022, you have Democrats turning out at about 2.5x Republicans. So it's good news for Republicans, but at the end of the day, Democrats are still in an advantaged position in this primary. So interesting to see this, because this was a big talking point coming out of the last election. There were a number of political action committees that came together to spend money on the far right end of the Republican Party to try to defeat what were perceived to be establishment Republicans. Governor Abbott had two challengers to his right. As I like to say, I did not know there was a right, but he had two challengers who ran to Governor Abbott's right. You had very conservative challengers to Republican members of the legislature running from their right. Well, the reality is most of that effort happened to no avail. The efforts to try to defeat, pretty conservative Republicans, but who are perceived to be more moderate than they might be, those efforts failed. There were not really any defeats of perceived Republicans in name only by those folks. At the same time, you had Republican challengers on the State Board of Education who ran against incumbent members, really going hard after so-called critical race theory, which, as you know, was banned by the legislature during the teaching of critical race theory in 2021, although I have a strong suspicion that if you pulled 10 members off the floor of the legislature at random who voted to ban critical race theory and asked them to define it, they couldn't. But nonetheless, this is a hot button topic in politics these days. And you actually saw some people who were hard against critical race theory defeat incumbent members of the State Board of Ed. The State Board of Ed determines, among other things, curriculum taught in schools, the curriculum in textbooks. And, this is a place where if you're not paying attention, real change comes to Texas. This is one of these things that most people don't know about, don't pay attention to, maybe don't even vote for the people in these races. and yet it actually has a material impact on the lives of every student and in every school in the state. We've had this challenge in Harris County, as we talked about, where yesterday Isabel Longoria, who is the Harris County Elections Administrator, resigned because you had a couple of problems related to the way the election was administered last Tuesday. First, it was a significant delay in the results being provided, in the counting of votes. But then we find out that there are some number of ballots, thousands of ballots, maybe as many as 10,000 ballots, that were simply not included in the initial count. And there are a couple of significant elections in Houston that were decided by very small margins, and one statewide race, the Democratic primary for Attorney General, where these 10,000 ballots actually may very well affect the outcome. So the kind of, I would say, consistent inability of Harris County to have its act together on elections has been a problem. This is not the first time that that's been the case. So let's talk about the big races on the ballot for a couple of minutes here. So the governor's race. So Governor Abbott, who has been in office for 2 terms, very well known to the people of Texas and to his party, was Attorney General for 3 terms before that, runs for re-election and has 2, I would describe as significant challengers. I'm not sure Chad Prather would be described as a significant challenger, but Alan West, who had been the chair of the Texas GOP and had been a member of Congress once upon a time from Florida, veteran of the military, and Don Huffines, who'd been a former state senator from Dallas, defeated for re-election in the 2018 election cycle. Both challenged Governor Abbott from the right. West doesn't spend very much money. Huffines actually spends quite a bit of money on his challenge to Abbott. Abbott ends up at 66%. I asked people in the run-up to the election, what do you think Abbott's number is going to be? And they said, well, we think he'll get to at least 55. And I thought, if the incumbent governor of Texas in a primary only gets 55%, that is actually a warning sign. My own intuitive sense was he needed to get to 60. Well, the fact that he got to 66 is actually good for the governor. The people who ran against him ran to his right. Now they lose to Abbott. What's going to happen to look at the number of people who voted against Abbott between Huffines and West. It's a little bit fewer than 500,000. 500,000 Republicans. Where are they going to go in the fall? Are they going to vote for Beto? No. Some may stay home. Some may decide they don't support Abbott because somehow they think Abbott is too liberal. I can't even believe those words as they're coming out of my mouth, that Greg Abbott is a liberal. That would be a trick to turn him into a liberal, right? They're all going to hold their nose and vote for Abbott if they're not going to just vote for him without holding their nose. So the governor has nothing to fear from this result. He sufficiently put the revolt down, getting to 66%. In the case of the Democratic primary, it wasn't much of a primary. Beto O'Rourke was always going to be the nominee. We knew it. The question was, what would his number be? When he ran for the Senate the first time in 2018, he got below 70% in the primary because South Texas was just not that into him, right? In this case, actually, he seems to have been able to engender wide support from all over the state in all of the voting blocks, and he got above 91%. But I want to direct your attention now and going forward to the number of votes. Let me go back. Greg Abbott got 1.3 million votes, and there are another 500,000 or so votes hanging out there that most of them, as I said, I think go back to Abbott. O'Rourke pretty much got all the votes that were available, and he got fewer than 1 million votes. There is an enthusiasm gap in this state between Democrats and Republicans. This is setting up to be not a good election cycle for Democrats. We can talk about why that may be, but this demonstrates that the challenge that O'Rourke's going to have. There are many more people turning out for the Republicans, at least in the primary, than the Democrats, and that trend is likely to only accelerate as we get into the fall. Look, I think this is going to be an interesting race. Democrats have not been competitive in Texas at the statewide level for a long time. Last time a Democrat was elected statewide was 1994 in Texas. I have people working for me at the Texas Tribune who are 25, 26, 27 years old, who literally were not alive the last time a Democrat was elected statewide. For them, it's like Lincoln striding the earth. It's like ripped from the pages of history. They have to take our word for it that there was a time when Democrats won elections in the state of Texas. And that's a problem. In part because you don't have people who ran campaigns successfully who are still around. So O'Rourke's got a pretty big mountain to climb. The Abbott people think they're running against O'Rourke, the presidential candidate, who just completely face planted, belly flopped. I think that they've got to be careful. They may be running against O'Rourke, the Senate candidate, who was fresh and new and energetic, went all over the state. He was a little bit like Jesus Christ Superstar with all the disciples smoking pot and touching the hem of his robe. You know, that was the O'Rourke vibe in 2018. That was not the vibe in 2020. And I think it may be closer to 2018 than 2020 in terms of which O'Rourke shows up on the campaign trail. But the reality is that Republicans continue to win elections statewide by pretty big margins. And even if O'Rourke does better, the polls have suggested, at least as of now, this is probably an 8 or 9 point race. And I will tell you that I think high single digits is probably right. That's probably where this race is. There's going to need to be a precipitating event that causes O'Rourke to do better than that. Abbott's going to have to do something really dumb or dangerous. There's going to have to be a grid collapse, which none of us want. The Democratic Party at the national level is not helping O'Rourke. I mean, and they're going to have to do a massive turnout operation, and we don't know whether that's something that they can actually pull off. This is Governor Abbott's political strategist the day after the election, talking about how they're just going to brutalize O'Rourke. They're licking their chops, going after this guy. We're going to take the wood to this guy. We're not going to take him off the mat. This reminds me when the people who didn't like him and he ran for Senate in 2018 called him beta, B-E-T-A, as opposed to Beto, as the opposite of alpha. They were trying to make him out not to be enough of a manly man. And it certainly seems to me that the Abbott people are trying to come at O'Rourke as not tough, and they're going to destroy him. They're going to brutalize him. And again, you know, this is a lot of big talk. It's big talk. One thing I think that they say that's probably right is that Abbott will spend more than $100 million. Abbott has significant amounts of money to spend on this race. O'Rourke has much less money to spend than Abbott and is fixing to raise less money than he raised in the Senate race. And he's going to need every dollar he can possibly get. The Attorney General's race was the next race we were watching. Ken Paxton, who is the incumbent, has been federally indicted. He has all kinds of ethics problems. He's been alleged to have had an affair in the last couple of years. He had 7 of his top assistant attorneys general in the AG's office all walk out together and sign a whistleblower's letter accusing Paxton of this or that. And Paxton picked up 3 big name primary opponents: George P. Bush, the land commissioner of Texas, son of Jeb Bush, nephew of the former president, grandson of the other Bush who was president; Ava Guzman from Houston, who was a former Texas Supreme Court justice; and Louis Gohmert, the congressman from East Texas. Every one of them says, I'm every bit as conservative as Ken Paxton, but I'm ethical. I'm not corrupt. He's corrupt. That was basically what they said during the primary. Anytime an incumbent gets into a runoff, it's dangerous. It's not necessarily fatal, but it means that more than 50% of the people, if you've been an elected official, more than 50% of the people in your party did not vote for you. And that just is problematic going into a runoff. So Paxton doesn't even get to 43%. The problem for the others is they were pretty far back. If there had been one ABK candidate, anybody but Ken, it might have been possible to beat him. But I think this shows you what the problem is. If you run multiple people against a vulnerable incumbent, you end up just dividing the ABK vote. And that's what happened here. So Bush gets into the runoff, but he starts out, he was 20 points behind Paxton. He's going to have to hope that every Guzman voter, at least, comes back out to vote in the runoff and votes for him. But a lot of the Gohmert people are going to vote for Paxton, we think. So this is going to be tough. I think if I'm a betting man, which I always hate to be, and I never should be in the predictions business, I got to think Paxton goes into this runoff with an advantage. So this is what we're looking at for the next 2 months. This it right here. On the Democratic side, nobody knows who these people are, you guys. Seriously. Any one of these people, you couldn't pick them out of a police lineup. If they crossed the street to punch you in the face, you would have no idea who these people were. That's the problem for the Democratic ticket. When you get south of Beto, it's a bunch of nameless, faceless people who no one has heard of and no one could recognize. Rochelle Garza is an ACLU attorney in the Valley. Okay, I've never heard of her. I'm paid to pay attention to this stuff. I've never heard of her. Joe Jaworski was mayor of Galveston. His grandfather was the special prosecutor in the Watergate case, Leon Jaworski. But again, most people have no idea who he is. Lee Merritt is a civil rights attorney in Dallas. Nobody knows who these people are. And again, look at the numbers. Paxton, Bush, Guzman, Gomert. The first two got more votes than the Democratic frontrunner. There were just not enough Democrats to win this race. Now, I think what they're hoping for is that something bad happens to Paxton, if Paxton's the nominee, and that there's more allegations of this or that sometime between now and the fall. They think maybe they can steal this race, but boy, that's going to be tough. On the lieutenant governor side, let me just point out the Democrats again. 2 Democrats going to a runoff. Really, nobody knows who these folks are. Mike Collier's run twice before statewide, once for lieutenant governor and lost. Michelle Beckley is a member of the Texas House. Dan Patrick is the lieutenant governor. They're going to have to beat Dan Patrick. It'd be really hard to do that. On the agriculture commissioner race, there was a competitive primary on the Republican side. The incumbent, Sid Miller, who, if you ever watch The Simpsons, is a little bit like the rich Texan, the guy shooting off his guns in the air. There was a sense that maybe he might be vulnerable, but he won with more than 58% of the vote. Railroad Commission is interesting. The incumbent chair of the Railroad Commission, Wayne Christian, was held below 50%, had multiple opponents. You may have heard about this woman, Sarah Stogner, who was an oil and gas attorney who wanted to get attention for her race. So she posted a TikTok video of herself topless on a pump jack. Now, I know that you think I'm making this up. I swear to you, I'm not. Google it. Google it. This woman exists, and she did what I said. And Christian was held below 50%. This is Sarah Stogner alongside Wayne Christian. It looks like Wayne Christian's in a runoff against Amy Winehouse. That was my first reaction when I saw these pictures. You know, so you have Wayne Christian running against a woman who posed topless on a pump jack. I've decided to brand this runoff Christian versus not very Christian. If you use that, you have to give me credit. I've trademarked that. And look, Christian's not going to lose. He's not going to lose, but primary runoffs are weird. You never know what's going to happen. In the case of the, where am I here? In the case of, we go back. Where is that? Okay. We had this oddity of this case of the congressional race in Plano. Van Taylor, the incumbent Republican, one of 2 Republicans in the Texas Republican delegation who voted for a bipartisan investigation of January 6th. And then all the Republicans in his district got mad at him and said, you shouldn't have done that. You're a traitor to Donald Trump. That's obviously a theme in politics these days. So Van Taylor is hoping to get through this primary, and he gets held below 50% by the former Collin County Judge Keith Self. Now, you'd look at these numbers and you'd say, well, Taylor's fine because he's more than 20 points ahead of his challenger. He'll get into the runoff and he'll win. But then toward the very end of the race, there are allegations that Taylor had an affair. And it was not just that Taylor had an affair, but he had an affair with a so-called ISIS bride, a woman married to an American who had defected and went to collaborate with ISIS against the U.S. Taylor is a 2-time Gulf War veteran, triple Harvard degree guy. I mean, he's an amazing resume, and he's been a pretty conservative member. He was in the legislature before. in both the House and the Senate. This was an enormous shock. So he ends his campaign before the runoff, like literally the day of or after the election. Amazing. Another big congressional race people were watching was in Laredo. Henry Cuellar, the longtime incumbent, one of the most conservative Democrats in the U.S. House, running against a very progressive candidate endorsed by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Jessica Cisneros, who ran against him in the primary 2 years ago, did not come close, but it was a race. This time, Cuellar has been raided by the FBI. The FBI raided Cuellar's home before the election. Cisneros made hay of that. She got within 800 votes. And so they're going to go to a runoff. I swear to you, there's going to be so much money spent on this runoff on both sides. It's going to be extraordinary. Cuellar's side and the Cisneros side. All eyes of the country are going to be on the outcome of this race. And then up in Dallas, the longtime Congresswoman retiring, Eddie Bernice Johnson, the race to replace her. Jasmine Crockett was a very liberal member of the legislature. She had not been in very long, but she was constantly on television when the Democrats left Austin to protest the overhaul of voting laws. She basically set up shop at MSNBC. Well, when this congressional race opened up, she got in it. Jane Hope Hamilton is another favorite of a lot of Democrats up in Dallas, but this was not a close race in the first round. And so this will go to a runoff, but Crockett is favored. In Austin, one of the new congressional districts, Greg Casar, who is a very liberal member of the Austin City Council, got elected without a runoff. Basically, he smoked all of his opponents. The interesting thing about this is that while Texas is a very conservative state, these three, if they get elected to Congress, have this weird effect of pushing the Democratic Party and the state to the left, really at complete counter purpose to the politics of the state generally, which tend to be very conservative. These three would be among the most liberal members of Congress, and they'd all be from Texas, which is so interesting. Primary day is the 24th of May. So we're going to have basically 2 months between now and then for all these races to play out. The last thing I'm going to say is I'll point out that Donald Trump is going to be a factor in the runoffs. Donald Trump endorsed a lot of candidates in the first round, including Ken Paxton, by the way, in the Attorney General's race. And how Trump decides to play his own role in this is going to be instructive. He can make or break Republican candidates in runoffs. And his name's not on the ballot, but I think it's important, as this column by Ross Ramsey in the Tribune said, to understand that Donald Trump, even if his name is not on the ballot, is very much going to be a factor in the runoff. Let me stop there. We've got about 15 minutes left. And as I said, Kelly and Amanda, I'm very happy to take questions about any of this stuff. Texas Tribune, politics in Texas, anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, that was awesome. I think I know much more than I did on 3-1. So I think starting with that and just the lack of voting, I think that was one of the main points that I saw. As you said, less than 1 in 5 Texans voted, or registered voters voted. And someone did have a question. Denise Janowski has a question that I think would really allow us to all be able to be more educated in being able to vote. Because I know sometimes people don't vote because they don't know all that information. And a lot of times the normal public doesn't. But what Denise is asking is, what responsibility does the local media community have to help truly educate the public about the candidates? She said she was younger. They covered it, so she knew it more.
Right. In some ways, these are the two halves of my remarks joined together, because the Texas Tribune came into business entirely in response to it's Denise, right? Entirely in response to what Denise is saying. If you don't know, look, I can tell you that there's an election coming. I can tell you about the candidates. I can tell you about the issues. That does not guarantee that you're going to be motivated to vote. But I can assure you this: if I don't tell you, you won't vote. If you don't know, you won't vote. If you do know, you might vote. If you don't know, you won't vote. Exactly. Yeah, hell yes, the media has every opportunity and obligation to tell the people in their communities, this is happening. This is going on, right? That there's an election. Here are the candidates. Here are the issues in play. Here are the fights being waged in your name. Here are the stakes you have in the outcomes of these fights. And what's unfortunately happened, we in the media business, to Denise's point, bear a certain amount of responsibility in not doing our job, our fiduciary responsibility to grab people by the lapels and almost shake them and say, this is worth paying attention to. We're all busy. We're all busier than our parents' generation was. But the media's main job is to tell people to tee up things for people in their busy lives, tell them this is worth paying attention to. That's my point.
No, that's
It's terrible. And by the way, we'll get into the fall. Turnout will be higher, but it will be more like 45% or 50%. I mean, we have terrible turnout in midterm elections, and we're typically 47th or 48th or 49th or 50th out of 50.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, maybe with the big governor race and how close it could be with Abbott and Beto, like you said, I think that could be just.
I want to be clear though that I don't know that I think the race is going to be close. I mean, you never know until you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be closer than most of the statewide races have been over the modern era. I think, Wendy Davis, who was as close to a celebrity as Democrats have had since Ann Richards, lost by 20 points.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Beto will lose by 20 points unless this race is a complete disaster for the Democrats, which, by the way, it could be. It's the first midterm of a president's first term, or the midterm of a president's first term. And historically, the president's party always does badly in congressional races and in legislative races. So this is a time when the Democrats are expecting to have a bad election cycle. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At least there's a little excitement. I think that helps when, big names are out there in the news. Kind of Denise's point, let us, learn a little bit more about it. So Marlena asks, how much weight does Trump support provide Paxton and some of the other candidates? And you kind of made a comment about that just a second ago, but can you elaborate on?
Yeah, I think Trump endorsing Paxton does help Paxton because Trump is basically the Trump party, not the Republican Party right now. You're either with Trump or you're on the outs with the party. That's kind of the way it goes. And the best indication of that is that one of the first things that Bush said following the primary day, when it was clear that Bush was going to get in the runoff, is that he said, I'm going to appeal to Trump, who he supports. But Trump chose to endorse Paxton and not Bush. He said, I'm going to appeal to Trump to see if I can get him to pull his endorsement of Paxton. Clearly, Bush thinks that Trump's endorsement would make a difference, right? I think Trump, not everybody loves the former president. Not every Republican loves the former president. But Trump is where the action is. Trump is where the momentum is. And if you're endorsed by Trump, you have a much better chance of passing muster with Republican primary voters than you do if he's not for you. Mm-hmm. And so I think he will be a factor, 100%.
And he also brings excitement. We all know, no matter which side of the politics you're on.
Well, it's either good excitement or it's not good excitement.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So Missy Always is asking, what are your thoughts on ads from candidates, attack ads, and why they do a better job? Is it fear? Should we focus more on voting than it is? I know as a consumer, you can see one positive ad and then an attack ad. So it's really confusing to the voter.
Right. I'm old enough and cynical enough to believe that positive advertising doesn't work. As much as I want to believe people vote for something, as often as not, they vote against something. In the same way that I'd like to believe that every election is about the next 2 or 4 years, but in reality, it's about the last 2 or 4. It's a referendum, not a choice. Even though elections inherently ought to be a choice and not a referendum, they're a referendum and not choice. During the primary, you saw Bush attack Guzman. That's because he knew that he was in competition for the non-Paxton votes with Guzman, and so he ran negative ads against Guzman. Paxton ran negative ads against Gohmert. Gohmert ran negative ads against Paxton. Negative ads work. Negative ads work, and especially they have 2 effects. One is that they drive voters from candidate A, who's the subject of the negative ad, to candidate B, C, D. But there's also a goal in trying to suppress the turnout among enthusiasts for that candidate. Let's say that you're a Louis Gohmert voter, or you think you're going to be a Louis Gohmert voter. you're as conservative as Ken Paxton. You're not going to vote for Bush. You're not going to vote for Guzman. Had there not been a Gohmert in a race, you would have voted for Paxton. Paxton attacks Gohmert. He's trying to do one of two things. He's trying to get the Gohmert people who've strayed back in the flock. But he's also trying to say to the Gohmert people who will not vote for Paxton because they think Paxton is corrupt, your guy is actually pretty bad also. Maybe you should just stay home. And that works sometimes. So negative ads have two different effects. To try to steal votes and to try to suppress votes.
It's such a fascinating industry to be in because you've got to understand that and how everything you say or who you go up against or align yourself or the people it's absolutely fascinating.
Not always fascinating good, by the way. I sometimes think
exactly.
Because the thing about attack ads is, what's that old line about how a lie is halfway around the world, before the truth reveals itself? You could put a negative attack ad on. I mean, look, they attacked Eva Guzman as being for critical race theory, which she insists she's not. But by the time the ad was out and we were all reporting on the ad, the damage was done. Unscrupulous negative ads are also often effective. And that's just something you have to know.
I think it goes back to what Denise was saying. Sometimes we don't know what's the truth.
Right.
So we have another question. John Del Tato asks, as a digital first media outlet, what are your most effective ways to drive traffic to your website to make sure that everybody is educated about what you're talking about?
Well, obviously, we love it when people become brand loyal and they come to us every day by just typing texastribune.org. But we spend an awful lot of time on SEO and search strategies. We have an 8-person audience team. The work only of building audience and having impact only begins, and achieving the reach we want to achieve really only begins on our destination website. We are very strategic about search, as I said. We're very strategic about referral traffic. We use social media as a referral tool. And it's about community building 100%. It's about curating a conversation about ideas out in the world, about the news, but really, we get an enormous amount of referral traffic from Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram increasingly these days. I think our audience on Instagram was up 136% last year over previous year. And we also are increasingly accessing sources of off-platform traffic, Apple News, Smart News, other aggregators, Flipboard. And we give our content away to anybody who wants to republish it. We had 422 Texas Tribune stories on the front pages of Texas newspapers last year. Wow. Our content runs all the time inside newspapers on their websites. We're a believer in total audience. And we aggregate different slices of our audience: site traffic, off-platform, digital republication, print republication. We use pixel tracking for all the stuff that runs elsewhere. So, from our perspective, audience is impact. Reach is impact. And we prioritize that. And it's the only way that we're able to persuade people that there's value in spending money with us. I mean, at the end of the day, we're nonprofits. When we've dealt with people, I used to be the editor of Texas Monthly, and we'd get RFPs all the time, and you'd provide your rate base, and you'd talk about the pass-along readership and everything else. We're not in the business of reselling eyeballs to advertisers at the Tribune. As a nonprofit, we're about mission, not transaction. But you have to prove the theory of the case. You've got to prove the concept with metrics. And for us, the metrics are total audience and reach.
Well, I'll say April has done a great job. She, as someone who's known April for over 20 years, April's always
she's
been
the best at what she does. There's
great seller. I don't know if she's on right now, but I think we all know and love her. And she's
better. Right.
Very well. Have any other, because y'all have such a success story in Texas, have any other states replicated what y'all have done?
Yes. So we've made a conscious decision from the beginning not to franchise the restaurant, as it were. We're not putting Texas Tribunes in other states, but other people are coming to us saying, we need something like the Texas Tribune. And so we want to come to Austin, learn from you how you run your business, how you think about revenue, how you built the staff, how you think about technology. Then we're going to take the parts of that we think would be applicable in our case and go back to Nevada or California or Mississippi, to name three of many examples. And we're going to start something that we will acknowledge is based on the Texas Tribune's model, the Texas Tribune of blank. But we're not the ones doing it. Fortunately, we were out front of this movement. We were ahead. We were first. And now, like mushrooms after a rainstorm, there are these news organizations popping up all over the country that are acknowledging their debt to us. We're grateful for that. But it's their work, not our work, right?
Yeah, but that's imitation is the best flattery, I guess, right? So
I mean, it's not even imitation. I mean, from our perspective, it's them doing what they think they can do to make their communities better. We're all for it.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, we've got two more quick questions.
Sure.
So someone asked, and you kind of talked a little bit about this, but if you can elaborate on it, are there any proven ways to increase voter excitement and turnout?
Well, I'd have to be in the politics business to answer that question, because it's really up to them to do that. From the standpoint of the media business, all we can do is lead horses to water. We can't make them drink. You know, we don't endorse candidates. We don't editorialize on issues. Our job is not to tell you what to think. Our job is to tell you to think. That's the distinction. And I would love to be in the position of saying, by virtue of what we do, vote. But we don't even do that, because that's not our job. Our job is to report the news. Hopefully that's going to be a motivation enough for you to participate civically. But you'd have to talk to the campaigns about what works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've convinced all of us on here that if you didn't vote on 3-1, you're going to vote.
Got to vote. Got to vote. Got to vote.
We're all going to vote.
Sure.
And then the last question is, and because we've got so many media folks here, TV, radio, and agencies, we're always asking media spend. What are your estimates on candidate ad spending for the general election window that opens up in September?
Well, I'd say in the governor's race, I mean, let's just take Abbott at his word. He says he's going to spend $100 million. O'Rourke raised more than $70 million in the Senate race in 2018. I think he probably raises no more than $40 million this time, which is still a lot. But as you know, it takes $1 million to buy 1 week of statewide media in Texas. This is a big state. If you spend $1 million in Montana, you buy the seat, right? I'm betting that in the governor's race, it's probably upwards of $130 million in total. Whether Abbott ultimately spends that $100 million or not, I don't know. There are not going to be a lot of other statewide races where there's going to be an enormous amount of spending, with the possible exception of the Attorney General's race.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually think that in terms of the amount of money that goes from politics to the media business, it's going to be a pretty good year. Election years always are.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good news to all of our TV stations here, possibly radio, but hard for us advertisers because we get bumped. It's supply and demand makes it a little hard.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's good.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care.
Yeah, thank you so much, Evan. We appreciate you. You're always so informative, and we always enjoy hearing from you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in April at the Star Awards Gala, and we will see you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.